I had my beer there. I thought it was a nice little flavor of wait. Oh, it's on the okay. Yes, it is. It was on. So once again, just asking very politely if people would take their seats. There's going to be a lot of time afterwards to. Okay. Okay, so as people just taking their seats, and I know a few people are still at the bar before it closed, so we'll wait a moment or so. Thank you very much. Right, well, welcome everyone. My name is Carolyn Egan and I'm a member of the International Socialist, also president of the United Steelworkers Toronto Area Council, whose hall we are in today. And I just want to say on behalf of Abdul Samad, who is out slinging the beer and wine and whatever else is out there, he and I want to welcome you to our hall. And we are more than pleased to be able to donate the hall for this memorial for John Bell, who was very well loved here. And I'm just going to do a couple of introductions, and I just want to say also that we recognize in this hall and the International Socialist and all of you, I'm sure, that we are on the territory of Indigenous peoples, and in the time immemorial, this was the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and most recently the Mississauga of the Credit, and is home now to many Indigenous peoples, Métis, others who come from all across Turtle Island. And as John Bell always said, and you saw it reflected in his comments, to simply say that is never enough. It's always just a prelude to speaking about the solidarity that has to be shown to Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island. And that was part and parcel of John's life. There's no two ways about it. And the International Socialists as well, and the Steelworker Area Council. And whether it be the, what's that mean? West Coast, or land back, the Haudenosaunee land back struggle here, not far, in Brantford and that area of Ontario, or the Mi'kmaq in eastern Canada for the lobster fights, for the lobster fishers out there. This was something that was very near and dear to the heart of John Bell. And so when we speak about the land acknowledgement, we're certainly giving our solidarity, but we're also promising to continue the fight shoulder to shoulder with Indigenous peoples across this land. I think that I also want to mention that this hall was somewhere where John Bell spent a tremendous amount of time through his political life, moving here from London, Ontario. And he was someone who attended so many events, whether they were put on by the IS or other political tendencies, other political organizations that had nothing to do with the International Socialist tendency, because he was a man who was always on the side of workers, on the side of the oppressed. And whenever a gathering would take place here, he would so often be a part of it. And he was, as you'll find through the incredible stories that you're going to hear, because this is a hall that's full of stories. John Bell was a man who was full of stories. His forebears from the Orkneys, if I got it properly, and all the way up. And you know, you can look back and you can see some of the struggles that the United Steelworkers were part of, Urban Toy and Radio Shack, others, the many struggles that took place. And we've had many memorials here of working class people who fought against the corporations, against the governments, for the dignity and respect that working class people require. We are a tremendously diverse organization, United Steelworkers, and as much as John took part in events here for political causes, he also actually worked in this hall. John, and we were trying to remember, how did he get fired? Abdul got hired. Do you remember? I have no memory how he got hired. He didn't come up through the Steelworkers, but he got hired by Stuart Deans, one of our area coordinators, to be what we call support staff, which generally speaking were women. Generally speaking, what shall I say, performed clerical, secretarial function. John was the very first man who ever took one of those positions. And he brought a particular style to it, if I may say, a particular politic to it, as he helped put forward the grievances in the sense of writing up all the neat things necessary, the health and safety, the WSIB appeals, all the things that working people, particularly those who work with their hands, which we have so many here, needed to live a life of dignity. And John brought a political consciousness. He was a revolutionary socialist to the end. He could have been many, many things, as you know through his writings, and people will tell you through the stories of his friends and his colleagues, his comrades, and so many of you here, we're just thrilled. And he will speak to you about they will speak to you about all the things, the incredible contributions that John made, a man whose life was given, frankly, to the struggle for a better world for all. And that was, he did it through so many ways, you'll hear so well. And the hall echoes, really, it permeates the lives, the memorials, the words that have been spoken about our fallen comrades. And John's going to join that group today through this memorial, and we're very, very pleased and honored that that will be the case. And I want to bring a little bit of a light note before it goes on and you hear all the incredible stories of his friends, comrades, family. Once upon a time, when John first got here, we recognized that usually on support staff or secretary day, the area coordinator would always give flowers to those who did that work, okay? And he said to me, Stuart Deans, who could not be here today, and gives his solidarity, his condolence and sympathy to the family particularly, and all his friends. I said, what are we going to give John? I don't think flowers are appropriate. I said, well, I don't know. He said, let me think. All right, so the day came. In came the florist delivery van and the two other support staff. Beautiful flowers, beautiful flowers. Nothing for John. The fellow said, wait, I've just got to go out. Goes back to the truck, comes back in with an array of cactuses. And you can well imagine if you know, the pictures of John, the picture of John on the back of the incredible booklet, the pamphlet that we put together of his journalism during COVID. And he just put that incredible John Bell smile and an incredible John Bell laugh. And he looked up and said, this is perfect, steelworkers. Thank you so much. And it was just incredible. But so I will leave it at that. And we were going to have, I think, a tremendous program. Pam Johnson and others put this together. And I think you'll get a real sense of a man who gave his life to revolutionary socialism. He in every sense of the world, certainly in the steelworkers' view and the view of the International Socialists, he was a true working class hero. We salute you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carolyn, for starting us off. I hope I don't drop this mic. My name is Pam Johnson, and for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm a longtime friend of John's, really a soulmate, former partner, political comrade, and primary supporter for John through his 8-year ordeal with his health. A warm welcome to everyone, and thank you all for being here, and for everyone watching on YouTube, and a special shout out to my family in Indiana. John and I talked about his wake many times. There were several rehearsals of this moment. And he spent hours creating his wake playlists, which you were listening to when you arrived. He, of course, wanted to be remembered for who he was and what he did in his life. But mostly, he hoped this would be a hell of a good party. So I think we should honor his memory and do that today. And just before I talk about John himself, I want to acknowledge some people here today and some who are not. First, his family members who traveled here from his hometown, London, Ontario, his sister Bev, his brother Pete, and partner Carol Lee, his nephew Mitch, partner Shannon, and their children Henry and Marin, his niece Quinn, and Quinn's mother Darlene, and the family who couldn't make it today, John's nephew Jack and partner Natasha, John's nephew Connor and partner Julia, and their new baby Kieran. And very much missed today, John's brother-in-law, Roy. I also want to acknowledge the people who supported John and me through his very long health journey. John said so many times how much it meant to him that you stayed in touch and visited him while he was so isolated. Lynn, Mark, Jim, Bob and Jean, and the pastoral care team at Trinity St. Paul, his last workplace. Lynn at his apartment building, and his dedicated friends of decades, Charlotte, Aisha, Colin, Keith, Kim, Alex, John, Sung Lim, Brian, Faylene, Christine, and Michelle. And most especially, I want to acknowledge my partner, Maureen. She was my backstop in all the years of John's health journey, and more than once was the first person to get to John in a crisis situation. Maureen mentioned that at one point, John thanked her for accepting him into our family. Maureen said to me, "There is not enough real love in the world, and there is no reason to get in the way of love. Love can carry everything forward." I am so grateful. I met John in 1982, shortly after I arrived in Toronto from Kitchener via Indiana. to start grad school in dance at York University. I met him at a pickup softball game that was a collection of dance students and friends who had connected in different ways, including through socialist politics. It's great to see many of those people here today, 40 years later. I was very involved in my independent dance artist life at that time. I was dancing, choreographing, and producing shows in Toronto, and I had the wonderful opportunity to tour the world as a performer in a prestigious show. But I was also feeling like something was missing and that I wanted to connect with the world in a different way. It was the early 1990s, the time of the Oka crisis and the first Gulf War. Capitalism in crisis and neoliberal policies were ravaging the conditions for workers and gutting public services, and this is what I was seeing. And nothing like a little hobnobbing with the wealthy and entitled, as I had in my travels, to make me question how society was organized and for whose benefit. I had stayed in touch with John and the baseball friends, and I'd moved in and out of relationships, but I started to talk to John about politics, and it drew us together, and we became partners for 10 years. I became a socialist and joined the International Socialists, which he belonged to already. It was one of the better decisions in my life. Many of you will know something about John's journey to becoming a socialist from his stories of his first jobs, working up north on the railroad, working at the candy factory in London, and organizing a union at Carleton University. He also credited the encouragement he got from his favorite Aunt Phyllis to question, to read Marxist theory, and to think critically about the world that he saw in front of him. John and I had a great time living together. It was an easy enjoyment. John marveled at the world, and he was interested in and had vast knowledge of so many things: film, music, baseball, never a dull moment. We camped, we birded, we watched golf on Master Sunday with a bottle of champagne. We traveled to see my family in Indiana and Florida, to see his family in London, Ontario, and the Orkneys. We talked politics, and he cooked. This period coincided with John leaving his job at the Inuit Art Gallery and working full-time writing and editing Socialist Worker. It was one of the happiest periods of his life. John and I moved out of our partner relationship, but remained close friends and political comrades. In 2016, after feeling unwell for quite a while, he got a diagnosis of IPF, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, a progressive, untreatable death sentence. And he asked me to be his primary supporter through what was an unknowable journey, and I agreed. His failing lungs and facing his mortality was one of the scariest times of John's life. It was the beginning of a long period of endless hospital visits, oxygen tanks, a dizzying array of medication, and a very long period of relative isolation from his more public life. He had a very successful lung transplant in 2018, but the anti-rejection drugs that he had to take wrecked his kidneys. He began the drudgery of going to the hospital 3 times a week for dialysis. This was happening just as the COVID pandemic was beginning. It turned out to be a much more grueling experience for John than the transplant. Last October, John fell and broke his leg. And though he had successful surgery and was beginning to rehabilitate, he contracted COVID at the hospital, and it began a downward spiral of complications. He was never able to leave the hospital after his fall and died there on March the 28th. It was remarkable to me that he could endure his long years ordeal, but he said one time that he felt lucky because he could live the life of the mind. Right up to his death, he was watching films, listening to music, and in the last few months of his life, learning Chinese cooking on YouTube. But what really kept him going through his entire health ordeal was his writing, including writing about his firsthand daily experience of the fractured healthcare system. His friend and comrade Michelle has compiled a pamphlet of his writings as a gift for everyone to take home, and I hope you will. He would most want to be remembered for his writing, and I want to read this quote from one of the many messages people sent after his death. John Bell's wit and insight was a force of nature. He used it in such a way that you wouldn't find yourself despairing after reading his work, as can so often when you read about the problems that the world is facing. But rather, his writings left you feeling inspired to change the world. Indeed, to the end, he said, "This is a world worth fighting for." I love you, John Bell. I was inspired by you. I will miss you, and I count myself lucky to have known you. Raise a glass if you have it to John Bell, and up the rebels.
Hang on a second. I get myself set up here. Thank you. I have to change glasses. Getting old as hell. Thank you. I am Beverly Cameron, and I'm here today, thank you, to speak on behalf of my brother Peter and the rest of the family whom you've already met. You stole some of my material. Okay. Missing are my son, Jack, John's nephew, and Jack was called the king of the nephews simply because he was older. And I also want to mention that his nephew Connor is out in the West reforesting, which we know how very important that is right now. I want to tell you about John, our brother, uncle, son to Janet and Jerry, and I hope to tell you something you didn't already know. He was born 369 days after me, so do the math. My mother always said John was living proof that breastfeeding is not a good method of birth control. After him came Tommy and Peter. Johnny and I were very close in age, and he said I taught him many bad habits, like climbing fences. Johnny was cute as a button with bright red hair, which he inherited from our mother. You will notice that he was always wearing plaid shorts, and in some pictures, he was carrying a silver gun. I recently sent him a copy of that picture and asked him about the gun, and he replied, somebody had to get the bad guys. His path was set. John never stopped getting the bad guys. In school, John was an average student, but that doesn't mean he wasn't brilliant. When we got cable TV in the 70s, we would race home from school to see the movies on WSEE TV Erie. We loved Godzilla, and John cut his comedic chops on the likes of the Three Stooges and the Marx Brothers. In school, John had his first thespian experience in the play Don't Drink the Water by Woody Allen. John loved Woody Allen. I had the pleasure of living with John in 1976 when I returned to London to attend UWO. We shared an apartment and he was unemployed. You get in the picture here. He was such a slob. He was lazy. Oh my gosh. I would come home from school in the afternoon. He's sitting cross-legged on the couch in his house coat with a full ashtray in front of him, and the kitchen would be a disaster. Anyway, you could walk from the door of his bedroom all the way across to the bed and never hit floor because of the clothes strewn all over the floor. Anyway, it couldn't have been that bad because I lived with him again in the summer of 1979 and also with my friend Donna. Donna said it was a summer of gin and tonics. Pam, you must have read him the Riot Act because he did clean up his act a little bit. Johnny was an excellent son to our mom, Janet, coming from Toronto as often as he could when her health failed. They were very good friends. He had compassion for our father, Jerry, which was revealed in one of his essays. Our father didn't make young John's life easy, but John recognized in later years that our dad suffered from untreated PTSD, the result of being a Spitfire pilot in World War II, and he forgave him. John was passionate about many things. He was a terrific cook, as are all of my brothers and my father. He enjoyed the planning and procuring as much as the eating. He would tell me about the vendors at his local market, the shops along the streets where he lived. I have inherited his stock pot, and I've already burned something in it, so it feels quite at home with me. He loved to share meals with his friends. He was passionate about birds and birding, and he knew that our songbirds were the veritable canary in the coal mine. He and Pam would travel to have bird watching getaways, and he enjoyed the birds from his balcony at his apartment, but not the pigeons. He would tell me about wonderful sightings in the Don Valley on a hike. And let's not forget about John's passion for the game of golf. At his 50th birthday, he had an empty golf bag that we were supposed to put money in, and he got himself a new set of clubs. He wasn't a great player. Pete says Johnny was the only person he knew who could lose a ball in a golf simulator. But he loved to watch the game on TV in typical Johnny fashion. He would know the history of the course, the tournament, the background of the players, and how well liked they were on the tour. I liked Phil Mickelson, he did not. You dare phone him on Master Sunday, he wouldn't answer. He was enjoying champagne and his made pate. Johnny was a walking encyclopedia, a fountain of knowledge about everything. He espoused the family motto, I may not be right, but I have an opinion. You didn't want to be against him in a game of Trivial Pursuit. Soul and the roots of music, and he taught me to love Bobby Womack and the Penguin Cafe Orchestra. Mitchell, are you ready to help me? Okay. Johnny B would often give us and the kids mixed tapes that he thought we would enjoy. One year, he gave his nephews, Jack and Mitchell, mixed tapes named Hats of Meat, with appropriate pictures on them of people wearing hats of meat. Jack's tape had a song by Rage Against the Machine called, what was the name of it, Mitchell?
It was called Killing in the Name.
Okay. And it went like this.
You want the chorus?
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll go in the chorus.
How old was he?
15, maybe. We're getting to the good part.
Yeah.
Good. No, I didn't get to it yet?
No.
What does it say? Sounds like a John song, doesn't it? What's the chorus?
Well, the main, there's a part of the chorus that continuously repeats, "Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me." I think my older brother was 14 years old when he got this CD. He was 14 years old in one day when it was taken away. Gladly, he did get enough music through to us that we got a piece of it. And now I'm okay playing it in front of my 4 and 2-year-old children.
Thank you. I called Johnny that night and I tore a strip off of him. Anyway, he took it. Okay. Navigating the last 10 years or so was a difficult road for Johnny. When he was diagnosed with IPF and knew he would need a lung transplant, he discovered he wouldn't be a candidate unless he had an immediate next of kin. And he asked his dear friend, Pam Johnson. Health professionals were skeptical. A friend will never stand up. A friend will not suffice. But Pam proved them wrong. Time and again, she stepped up, dropping everything. I'm sure she got more than she bargained for as Johnny's health deteriorated. Pam coordinated care, transportation, cleaning, shopping, accompanied John to many appointments and sat by his bedside for many hours, always with a gracious compassion and a good sense of humor. We must also thank and acknowledge the support she received from her partner, Maureen, who sacrificed while Pam supported John. Pam, you were a great comfort to Johnny. You have earned our heartfelt gratitude and admiration, and you will always be a part of our family. Johnny loved you, and so do we. I want to say a word also about John's circle of friends, here and afar. There are many names I heard with reference to visits, meals, these are my grandchildren, canoeing, camping, travel to Birch Island and the county, how Johnny enjoyed and looked forward to times together with his friends, frequently involving food and drink. I can just hear his signature laugh as you sit around the table catching up on friends and family. Johnny was a people person. He could talk to anyone, and he was always interested in their story. He made friends wherever he went, in his workplaces or neighborhood, in his work as an activist and journalist. I was very proud of my brother and his chosen path. Johnny never regretted or looked back. He was looking forward to the next cause and we're bringing light to the injustice in the world. I hope my words today have done our brother justice. He was dearly loved and admired by all of us, and he will be greatly missed at our family gatherings and significant events. Johnny loved our connection with Scotland. He and Pam enjoyed a wonderful holiday in Scotland and Orkney, and they took some of my mother's ashes there after she died. I think it only fitting that I should do the same for him next spring. So, accompanied by some family, I will take some of his ashes to Orkney and scatter some of him into a bunker at the old course at St. Andrews. He would have ended up in the bunker anyway. Thank you for honoring my brother today with your presence and your ear. I will just finish with a piece that I love. It's called Empty the Boat Seeker. Empty the boat, seeker. Empty the boat and ride on down the stream. Once you have lightened your load, your boat will swiftly find its way to the sea. Once you find your way, alone and unafraid, once you have broken the ties, your freedom is guaranteed. You are the light. You know the way. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Colin Savage. I'm a professional clarinetist and recorder player and part-time photographer. And I met John Bell in late 1982 when my friend Peter James moved into a shared house down on Crawford Street near Queen Street. John was living there with Michelle and later, or soon after, Mark Schaub. And then a few months later, Lorna Day moved in, and it was an interesting place. John had many circles of friends with a variety of interests, and I'm lucky to be a part of a group that was connected mostly through shared leisure activities that we all enjoyed. I'd say much of my time with John was spent having fun of one sort or another, and he was always enthusiastically involved. It started probably with the Sunday pickup softball games that we've heard about, which continued every summer for about 10 years. And our friendship grew to encompass cooking, poker, golf, darts, hiking, canoeing, and other pastimes where we could enjoy each other's company. At a baseball game, John was a wonderful companion with a wealth of knowledge and insight. I remember a trip to a Blue Jays game at the Mistake by the Lake at the exhibition stadium. We bought $4 tickets from a scalper It was the 80s, remember, $4. And we sat on the bleacher seats just baking. So when the opposing team took the field, John was like, "Oh boy, Baltimore Orioles." And there's Cal Ripken, as usual. John was a longtime Dodgers fan, and there was much celebration in his apartment on Yonge Street in 1988 when they won the World Series. John was always ready to help with a communal task. He and Mark and Peter organized a crew of volunteers to paint all the common areas in that house on Crawford Street in one day. So living room, dining room, kitchen, and 3 floors of stairs and hallways, which we did. We stopped for beer and pizza in the middle of it, gave it a second coat of eggshell white, and it was a much more pleasant place to live after that. John's help was also integral in many large batches of homemade pickles and barbecue dry rub, and quite a number of apartment moves amongst many of us until our backs made us stop doing that. Through the generosity of Ken and, this thing's on wheels, of Ken and Holly Dewar, several of us were able to join them for a relaxing week or so at a cottage on the Whitefish River First Nation at Birch Island, up in Northern Ontario. From 2008 till 2016, John was a fixture on the porch doing his crossword puzzles, swimming off the point with a pool noodle, or whipping up a breakfast frittata for 6 or 7 people. It was a good short order cook, it's true. As usual, John was most enjoyable company, contributing his own particular perspective to discussions on history, movies, or current events. He was helpful in the kitchen and with other tasks, and ready for delicious booze drinks on the dock at 5 p.m. He won and lost as much as anyone else at the regular nickel-ante poker games, but then he was never a good bluffer. Maybe he was too honest, I don't know. I will always be grateful to John that he convinced Charlotte to join him and my buddy Scott and myself for a week of canoeing in the wilderness, which turned into 5 or 6 years of revitalizing yearly trips, including John's last to Killarney Park. The tent deployment was Charlotte's tent, Scott's and my tent, and John's tent about 40 feet away, so we could all get some sleep. There are a number of John's former roommates here today who can attest that he had a thunderous snore, which remarkably dissipated after he got the new lungs. I don't know what that was about. Curiosity was one of John's admirable traits. Witness his omnivorous musical tastes, from Mavis Staples and Betty LaVette to AC/DC, from Herbie Hancock and Quincy Jones to Frank Zappa. He gave me all his Zappa vinyl too, which is very kind of him when he downsized. One day when I visited him in the hospital last spring, I mentioned I'd been rehearsing the 7th Symphony of Finnish composer Jan Sibelius in Mississauga with the orchestra, which led us to an interesting discussion about the challenges of a composer trying to maintain his artistic independence and stay alive during the Finnish Civil War in 1918, and again during Nazi occupation during the Second World War. And those were political histories that John knew well, and so we had a very interesting discussion. When I returned the next week for a visit, John had listened to the 7th Symphony of Sibelius and told me which aspects he particularly enjoyed. My own orchestral performance of the piece was 3 days after John left us, so I had a little extra inspiration to savor being in the moment. The concert went very well. I'm also grateful to John for sharing his genuine enthusiasm for life and for his friends. He always made one feel accepted and appreciated. He had pet nicknames for many people, or a subtle shoulder squeeze, or in my case, gentle teasing and ribbing, which ensured I never took myself too seriously. I've contributed a few photos to this afternoon's slideshow. In most of them, John is looking directly into the camera and smiling. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Kim Koyama, and I met John, I think, in 2004, which was when I first fell into activism somewhat by accident. And John was one of the people who ensured that activism became a really important part of my life and will always be an important part of my life. I think of him as something of a mentor, even though there was no formal relationship. But he modeled for me and led by example who I want to be. He was compassionate, he was passionate about his beliefs, and he just lived without compromise. In the days following his death, I was trying to think of my favorite memories of John. And I came to realize that the most important memories are not necessarily the big moments. They're not necessarily the milestones. They can be quite insignificant things. And I realized after a few days that there was one memory of John, and it's the only memory that keeps coming back to me regularly, not frequently, but maybe a few times a year. And it's a very small thing, and I want to explain it to you. Some years ago, I went to a social gathering, and John was there. And when I arrived, he greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. And it's a very small thing. It's an action that's repeated a million times around the world every day. But for a straight man to kiss a gay man on the cheek, to me was so meaningful and touching, because as far as we've come, as progressive as we want to think we are, we're still in the era of no homo. I'm gay friendly, but I'm not gay, just so you know. But it said a few things to me about John that are so important. It firstly said that he was completely comfortable with his own sexuality. It said that he was compassionate and loving, as I think all of us know that he was. And most of all, I think it says that he just didn't give a shit about what other people thought. and so that's something I will always remember. Those of you who know me know that humor is very important to me. It's something that I think is a really powerful tool in fighting against sadness and depression and anger and just the weight of the world and all the things that we're struggling with right now. And so I want to share a couple of bits of humor. One being that a few years ago, pre-pandemic, I was sitting around with John and a couple of others, and we were talking about death. And somebody said, okay, at your funeral, who do you want to give your eulogy? And John didn't have to think about it. He answered right away. He said, Faylene, because you wouldn't be able to do it without crying. and that's funny, but it's also, there's a great deal of affection there and also a great deal of mischief, which is something that I loved about John. And lastly, I think one thing that I will always remember is John's laugh. And I can hear it right now. And he had the kind of laugh that when you got him laughing, his laugh sometimes became funnier than the joke. And that is something that I will hold close to my heart and cherish, and I hope that you can too.
My name is Charlotte. So 3 years ago, I lost my best friend unexpectedly. It was summertime, early COVID. As soon as John heard what had happened, he invited me over. We sat at the picnic bench outside of his apartment. I cried. He comforted me. He asked what she was like. I began describing her as fun, caring, creative, ambitious, a talented filmmaker. He stopped me and said, "No, tell me about her, about your experiences together." I was flooded with memories, but began telling him about who she was and what she meant to me. Today, I want to honor John and what he meant to me by sharing a few stories about our annual camping trip. I met John about 20 years ago during the height of the anti-war movement, and we quickly became close friends. For 6 summers, we traveled up to Massasauga and Killarney provincial parks, but these trips were more than just camping. Each began with paddling across several lakes, Colin and Scott in one canoe, John and I in the other. John was a natural storyteller and a wonderful mentor. He talked about everything, or I should say, we talked about everything, or I should say, John talked, and I listened with great attention. He talked about a variety of things: the War of 1812, golf, old Western movies, his thesis on Kipling, more golf, music, politics, his time working on the railroad when he slept through a gunfight. Though, as Colin said, if you know John's snoring, you'd understand why gunfire seemed quiet by comparison. We swam daily, a favorite activity for John, which often involved him leaping from rocks and into the water. I'll never forget, on one of our trips, he made a grand entrance by what can only be described as attempting to perform an entertainingly executed, yet totally chaotic, front flip with near full rotation, landing flat on his back in the water with a splash. Colin has the photos, which capture my look of shock, and John with the biggest grin across his face, and laughter ensued. Camping, though, was new for me, and I absorbed as much knowledge as I could from everyone. On our first trip, John noted that I wasn't equipped with a knife, a necessary tool for a well-prepared camper. He showed me his well-worn classic red Swiss Army knife. The following year, our trip fell on my birthday, and much to my surprise, John gifted me with the same model knife as his. These trips were full of lessons, from cooking on a camp stove to properly dicing onions, baking potatoes over an open fire, to making perfect pancakes in bacon grease. After several demonstrations, I quickly mastered the art of building a campfire and earned myself the nickname Fire Queen by our second trip. John always liked to joke that I ate better on these trips than I did at home. Our evenings followed tradition. As the sun set, we stoked the campfire, set up the euchre game, donned our dorky headlamps, emptied the Tetra packs of wine into our trusty camp mugs, and indulged in a bit of dark chocolate. By the 3rd year, and after much persuasion, I had finally convinced John to pack the poker chips. But it really didn't matter which card game we played. John seemed to always win. When John became ill, I stopped going on the camping trips. Instead, we hung out at his place in the backyard. We enjoyed barbecues in the summer, afternoon movies in the winter, Step Brothers being one of our favorite, and we watched golf pretty much year-round. The cooking lessons continued, of course, first up being meatloaf. Our card games progressed to cribbage, where John remains undefeated. Throughout the past 20 years, John has been a constant, influential presence in my life. Though he never had children, he was like a father figure to me. And although I'm an only child, he was like a brother. His unwavering dedication to justice, his guidance, and his unconditional love forever remain in my heart. This is what John meant to me. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rich. It's an honor to have been asked by Pam to come and say a few words at this those who know me, she was very adamant that it was a few words, as opposed to my usual long-winded diatribes, which John and I were ever together, it was hard-pressed to see who would get the last word in. Normally, I don't have a hard time getting up in front of people to say something, but this one has been on my mind since Pam asked me, trying to figure out what to say about John. And there's a few things that pop into my mind. There's a lot of things that pop into my mind when I think about John. The first ones are always about a basement in a church on Bloor Street, or the front steps at that church on Bloor Street. One of the places I first got to know John, when he was working on putting out Socialist Worker newspaper down in this dank little room. I think it became the Rainbow Room later. It's a horribly opposite name for what that room was. But sitting there as a young sort of activist coming into socialist politics, to listen to the arguments and the frustrations in that office, and this is pre-giant computer designs, listening to, and Paul Kellogg's here, listening to Paul and John argue with each other about how to use this machine. I don't even know what it's called, but they used to have to get a photo to fit the column, they would have to use this giant machine to do it, and the two of them would just be arguing with each other about whether the size was right. Well, if we put that picture, we can't use this headline. And I would just sit there like, what is wrong with socialists today? Good grief. But nonetheless, that's where I got to know my politics, was in that basement with people like that, arguing about how to say something very complex in a very short newspaper article. The other thing that pops into my mind is knowing John after he quit smoking. And I still smoked at the time, and Sid can attest to this as well if you talk to him. John loved to badger me to go outside and have a cigarette. Come on, Richard, you're going to go out and have a cigarette now? Come on, let's go have a cigarette. Just so he could stand beside me and breathe deeply. He's the only person I knew who quit smoking that still loved being outside with smokers. And I think I had to go through almost 2 packs a day when I was working there just to satisfy his insatiable desire to stand beside me having a cigarette. It's crazy. To also be very young and coming into a socialist movement full of great people, it was nice that John also had a sense of humor and loved some of the things I'd loved as a kid. You could talk to him for hours about who was the best character in SCTV, what was the best skit, the movies, talking about, Mel Brooks movies, whatever it was, that sense of humor, the comedies, all of those things. Towards the end, on his birthdays, I would always send him a picture from, oh my goodness, my brain is going on me these days, from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, or Brooklyn, is that what it is? Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It's probably the only cop show John and I liked, because it actually made fun of the police more than celebrating them. But there's a skit with Captain Holt, if you know that thing, where he's forced to do a little birthday dance. So I would always send that to John Bell on his birthdays, just to hope that I got a little chuckle out of him. But also the movies he loved. He opened up all kinds of doors for anybody that wanted to talk to him about movies. And the fact that he nicknamed me Ricky the Carnivorous Pony on our third meeting and refused to tell me where he got that name from. And this is also pre-internet. You couldn't just Google something. You had to actually ask around, what is this Ricky the Carnivorous Pony? And he wouldn't tell me. And then finally one day I went into a movie store and I said, somebody here has to know. And it was, I can't remember, it was one of the movie shops on Roncesvalles, I believe. And I asked the person there, I said, do you ever know any movie with somebody, a character called Ricky the Carnivorous Pony? And the guy said, yes. Here it is, Honky Tonk Freeway. And I watched it and was amazed that this tiny little sliver of the movie, John could remember that and then bestow that nickname on me. He later decided that I was Dewey from Malcolm in the Middle, and constantly referred to me as Dewey, always bringing a smile to my face when he did so. But of course, outside of those quick little memories, there's a lot more to remember John by. Most his humor, and of course his rage at the injustice of the world that we live in. And it was incredibly important to me, and I think many others in this room, was his ability to take very complex ideas to understand the world, the ideas of Marx, the ideas of Trotsky, the ideas of Lenin, of Luxemburg, these great thinkers, to take these huge ideas and crunch them into these short little columns about current day issues and make them understandable. When I first came around revolutionary Marxist politics, which was over 30 years ago, good grief, John stood out in our group at that time. We had a lot of very wise and I would say some of them felt they were very self-important academics, as one who sought not to complicate issues for working people, not to make these ideas more complicated, not to impress upon you the nuance of everything and make you feel small, but to try to take those ideas and make them digestible for people so that you could understand, to help you grasp those ideas and to humanize socialist politics for something that ordinary working people could understand. And I never forgot that. And that stuck with me my whole life. No matter how much I talk, I'm still always trying to strive to be able to communicate those very complex ideas about why the world is the way it is in a very nice, short, digestible way, the way that John Bell would do it. He was always looking to build people up, not in a patronizing sort of way, but in a real way, because we also know he suffered no fools, right? The other thing that pops into my mind is that head shake of his when you said something that he thought was wrong. Oh, geez. Normally reserved when I would mock him for his love of golf or baseball and, tell him how much better football was. Of course, later in my life, when he found out I took up curling, he said, see, eventually you'll come around to a good sport. That head shake always will stick with me. But I want to just say this. John gave up a lot in his life to fight to make the world a better place. Right? And many here have done that as well. But John really gave everything he had to fight for a better world, not just for himself, but for everybody around him, for the downtrodden masses everywhere. The world and the working class, I feel, is much poorer today without someone like John Bell around to help give us some guidance, take those ideas, make them digestible, point out the callousness and corruption of the ruling class in a humorous way. To see that one column go up there, I know he was very upset when Conrad Black stopped owning newspapers because it meant he really had much less fodder to go after. But I'll say this, in the revolutionary socialist movement, we talk about standing on the shoulders of giants. And for me, I'll always feel that I'm standing on the shoulders of a giant named John Bell. God bless his soul. Long live John Bell. Thank you, everybody.
I'm taking all of my 7 minutes. Just so you know. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Aisha Dami Magweda, and on behalf of myself and my partner, Joe Magweda, I just want to acknowledge this wonderful gathering here to celebrate the incomparable John Bell. I want to acknowledge Pam Johnson. For years, you and John have modeled the strength and depth of chosen family bonds and shown us how relationships can change and flow in the most loving and unexpected of ways. Thank you for this beautiful gathering and for this opportunity to share a little bit of my relationship with John. I'm so grateful to be here with all of you. John's beloved family, his adopted loved ones, his many, many friends and colleagues, his social justice community, near, far, virtual and in person. It is a joy to honor him today with love and gratitude. Wow, I didn't think that I wouldn't be able to get through this, so I'm going to power on. In 2003, I joined the anti-war movement, and almost immediately I met Pam, who I instinctively recognized as a soul sister. At the time, John was Pam's partner, and in South Asian tradition, as many of you may have already seen on Facebook, whenever John and I were together, I began calling him Jija. It's a title of respect and of endearment for one's brother by marriage. And John being John, he embraced that Jija role for real and for 21 years. Early on, we would see each other routinely at our social justice work. I would sometimes go and meet him for lunch when he worked at Trinity St. Paul's. I remember that fateful day in the IS office with him when Charlotte announced to us that we had to listen to this really old band and proceeded to play Supertramp's Breakfast in America for us. For a boomer and a Gen Xer, that was pretty funny. A few years later, Gita joined Stephen Kerr and I to co-host our weekly radio show Voices of the Movement on CIUT, U of T Radio. Through the show, one story in particular became very important to us, that of Mo and Sophie Harkat. Mo was one of the secret trial five Muslim men who had been held on illegal security certificates by the Canadian government as the war on terror unfolded. Over the course of our coverage and subsequent advocacy events, John and I met Sophie and Mo, and they became our cherished friends. They send their love and thanks to John as well for his love, friendship, humor, and support. He was a good human from the Harkets in Ottawa. For some years, we lived close to each other around Witchwood Barns and would occasionally meet up on a Saturday morning to go to the weekly market. Gija would greet all the vendors by name, and he would chat with them, always supporting small and local businesses. Then, along with his grocery haul, we would pick up a few snacks and head back to his place at 13 Hawken and settle in for a few hours of cribbage and convo. While his much beloved Randy Macho Man Savage, his cat, would hide in the basement. And I wasn't sure why he was so afraid, because I was the one who was getting my ass handed to me on a platter every time I played crib with him. Aside from our one-to-ones, we gathered as often as we could with some configuration of our close-knit crew: Gija, myself, my partner Joe, Pam, Maureen, Charlotte, and Kim. One magical backyard garden party in 2016 comes to mind, a gathering filled with love and laughter, silliness, and belonging. I was grateful to live close to Gija in the initial stages of his illness, and then to be included by Pam as a part of his care team, leading up to and through his double lung transplant. He didn't dwell on how much time he may or may not have. He just committed to do everything in his power to be as well and healthy as he could. Taking on the overburdened healthcare system was not something Gija was able to do on his own. And through the challenges with hospitals, specialists, and appointments, he spoke often with deep respect and thankfulness for Pam, who was a steadfast and constant advocate, her partner Maureen, who held a steady and supportive space, his many friends and family who visited and helped him out, his dedicated healthcare workers, everyone who contributed in their own ways to his care and well-being. That was one of many things I loved about John, my Gija. He lived his values out loud, like solidarity, community, and connection, in all he was and all he did. Even through the ups and downs of his health, he never stopped standing up for what he believed in. He bore witness to the struggles of the world and those around him, and continued to give of himself, his time, his passion, his love, his support, and his words of resistance and power. One of his last Facebook posts was for Palestine solidarity and an end to violence and war. For me, we had come full circle, back to where our connection began. I've been reflecting since his passing on the incredibly high bar that he set on what it means to be a friend. He was one of my staunchest allies and supporters, often advocating for me, to me. When I told him something that was important to me, he remembered. When we talked, he was totally present and engaged. We talked and laughed and cried and ate and shared our lives. We stood for and with each other through celebrations, milestones, hardships, and life-altering experiences. Some days we had the deepest of exchanges, and others we simply sat content in each other's company, trusting that we were wholly seen, accepted, and deeply loved. Gija, I'm so grateful to have known you and to have been your sister and your friend. Of all the gifts and lessons of our enduring bond, you have left me with perhaps the most important learning of all: to be unapologetically yourself, to be present and love fully and fiercely, to follow your own compass and be truly comfortable in your own skin, and to never give up and never stop living this life. Thank you, Gija, for everything. I love you and I miss you. I knew this would happen as soon as I get up here. My name is Michelle. John was my good friend, my comrade, my coworker at a certain period, and my roommate. And I met him in Ottawa, where I joined the International Socialists. And at the time I met him, he wasn't yet a member of the organization, but he came out to meetings. And sometime after I moved to Toronto, escaping Ottawa in 1980, I ran into John. And I remember very clearly when I ran into him again. It was at DuPont subway station. And we both came up on the upstairs in the light, and I see it like it was yesterday. He was such a warm person, such a great smile and laugh. And he reconnected with the IS, the International Socialists, and joined the organization. And eventually, not too long after that time, we moved into the house that has been mentioned a few times on Crawford Street. It was myself, John, and my brother Andre. Both John and Andre are about 6 years older than me. And it's interesting to hear, Bev, what you had to say about his messiness, because in that relationship, I was the kid who was very messy, and he was the grown-up, and he was, as was my brother. And over the years, a bunch of people, including Mark Schaub and Lorna and Gordon Monahan and Peter James, many others went through that house. And there were a lot of good times on Crawford Street. And I remember John deciding one Halloween that he couldn't afford to buy candy. So he filled a bag full of pieces of advice for the kids. He said, be patient with your parents. They don't know any better. And I kept one of them that said, don't whine. And I actually found it a few days before I had to undergo some pretty heavy surgery 5 years ago, actually. And I texted him to say, I found your advice, don't whine. But the image that stays with me most clearly from that time at Crawford Street is John in the early morning. Like, he got up early, which for me at that age, it was 20, 21, whatever. I couldn't believe how early he got up, sitting at the kitchen table reading. And he just read and read. And for a long time, I thought it was sheer dedication and self-sacrifice, because for a lot of idiosyncratic reasons, that was how I approached reading, until I understood that he just took a lot of pleasure in it. It was actually hedonism. He loved to read. He also loved to write. And from the time he got involved with the IS, he produced a steady stream of articles where he combined his understanding of the world, his theoretical understanding, his knowledge of history, which was really impressive, his intelligence and his humor to make socialist ideas relatable. In the mid-1990s, when Mike Harris, can hiss now, when Mike Harris came to power, John quit his job, as was mentioned, at the Isaacs Inuit Gallery to work full-time for the IS. And I also quit my job at that time, as our organization made the jump from a monthly newspaper to a bi-weekly newspaper. Our office in the basement of Trinity St. Paul's was a funny little warren. There was even a lava lamp, if I recall correctly, in Paul's little part of the basement. And we spent countless hours working on not just producing a paper, but finding ways to connect with the developing one-day citywide general strikes that were happening across the province. It was an exciting time when the working class was flexing its muscles after a long period of downturn. And for John, as for all of us who share his vision of how working class people have the potential power to overturn this rotten system, it was our fuel, and we were well fueled in that time. John's articles from that period are a treasure trove, and he captures the possibilities and points out the contradictions in what was before us. He explained the obstacles, and he made us laugh through it all. And reading those columns is laugh out loud funny, but it's always deadly serious, and it's both things.
And he always tried to answer the question, what is to be done? What can we do in this circumstance? What can we do to move things forward? He also transmitted a lot of wisdom in his articles that he received from his own experience as a worker. One of them that is most memorable to me is always shit on the boss's time. Keep that in mind. He had an almost infallible sense of what people needed to hear as they were going into a fight. He really had a knack for it, to equip us with what we needed to remember. And his left jab column, it didn't sugarcoat the daunting tasks of trying to take on this system, of trying to fight against oppression and exploitation. It always ripped the mask off of the 1% who run the world, the real smarty pants at the top of the pyramid. And he showed the power of ordinary people to wipe the smirks off their faces. And whether it was Mulroney or Conrad Black or Frederick Eaton, Harper, Kenney, Ford, Trudeau. And it was something he shared with his comrade, Dave Fenario, who recently also passed away. An ability to really mock the 1%, not just as an empty thing, but to give us the strength to understand the rottenness of the underpinnings of their system. If words alone could build an organization, John's words would have built a lot. But writing was only a part of what he did. It was a very important part, and I'm glad how much people recognize that. But John did a lot of other things beside that monumental task he undertook in our organization. He organized branch meetings. He did speaking in branches. He sold the newspaper. He talked to people at protests. He talked to people on the street. The day-to-day work that is part of knitting together a network of socialists. He was part of it. He carried the load alongside his comrades. He did the work, and there was no separation of head and hand with John. He worked on many campaigns. The Toronto Health Coalition that was founded in Trinity St. Paul's Church when Shirley Douglas press ganged a number of us into launching that campaign in the Harris years. And he also worked on climate justice, on clinic defense. He defended the abortion clinics when they were under attack, and also on the Were No Angels campaign, which I just want to mention because it was one of the weird ironies of life that in the 1990s, he fought to make St. Mike's a public hospital. And he spent the last 5 months of his life in that hospital, in a wing named after our old enemy and anti-abortion crusader, Cardinal Carter. And he remembered that campaign, but he played a brilliant role, and you'll see the pictures of John with a pair of wings on his back in the Were No Angels campaign. John never took himself too seriously, but he took the project that he dedicated his life to very seriously. He took his friendships very seriously, as you've heard today. He appreciated the people around him, whether it was his coworkers and friends at Trinity St. Paul's, and Bob and Jean are here today, who played such an important role in his life. When he worked here at the Steel Hall with Rochella and Silvana, or his many friends, camping buddies, baseball buddies, movie buddies, his qualities as a friend made him a great comrade. Love, honesty, humor, and the long view. He had the long view. And that kept him going, and it keeps all of us going. When John started to get very sick, he was increasingly confined to his apartment. The more his world literally shrank, the bigger the world he shared with us in his writing became. And he never stepped away from his revolutionary work. It's absolutely mind-blowing. Honestly, it is mind-blowing. Anybody who knows what he was physically dealing with, that he wrote and wrote and wrote. He recognized that never has the need for getting rid of this system been more urgent, and he didn't back down from the goal in spite of the immense difficulties he faced. He knew that without a revolutionary organization, a socialist future is a pipe dream. That's what he was doing. That's what he was writing for. That's what he was trying to do. After he fractured his femur and was hospitalized last October, one of the projects he worked on was pulling together his articles on COVID from Socialist Worker and Socialist.Ca in the hope they could provide useful political analysis for the difficult struggles ahead. So COVID and capitalism, it's a plague diary of a left jabber. It says left jab columns about this topic. They begin in February 2020 and they go till March of this year. And I hope everyone can take a copy of this. It's a gift from John Bell to all of you and to all of our friends. It's a remarkable document, and preparing it has brought John's voice to life over and over again for me. As I was reading through it, you can hear it. And there are a lot of, it's a heavy topic, but it's hilarious that he conveys actually a lot of very good punches, left jabs at the people who are making our lives so dangerous. Two big themes run through these articles, and about capitalism's inhumanity and destruction, but also COVID's impact on the rise of the far right. This was a huge concern for John in the past, I'd say, well, since the Trump election of 2016, but it was a nonstop theme. When he had his lung transplant, I visited him in the ICU, and he was literally connected to every tube and machine imaginable, and he was worried about the far right and what was happening and seeing the developments around us. In this pamphlet, John says, my government is willing to sacrifice my health and possibly my life and the health and lives of tens of thousands of people with compromised immune systems and other issues to maintain business as usual. This is not exaggeration. I head to hospital this afternoon for 4 hours of essential dialysis treatment. I will be exposed to fellow patients who have COVID. I may be treated by health workers who are COVID positive. It's not a question of if I get Omicron, it's a question of when. And when I do get it, will my immune compromised body be able to fight it off? One thing is certain, if COVID kills me, you'll never learn my name, and that is not acceptable to me. And it's unacceptable to us as well. So whether through his own lungs or the lungs he so gratefully received, John Bell breathed life into a vision of a better world for all of us. He was a rare, beautiful, unforgettable assembly of atoms, and he was the real deal. And it's a profound loss for all of us, especially his family. Pam, Sid Lacombe, who's carried the paper since John passed away, and all the many comrades who worked closely with him. He lives on in our hearts, in the struggle. Say his name, John Bell. John Bell. John Bell. John Bell.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, everyone who joined us on the YouTube broadcast. We really appreciate it. Please grab the pamphlet of John's writings. If you'd like to make a donation, there are a couple of suggestions. One, the library in London, Every Child, A Book for Every Child is a program in that library you can make a donation to, or you can make a donation to the publication that was this life's work, Socialist Worker. Also, for the people here, let's grab a drink, let's grab a bite and have a chat. Thank you very much.
Thanks to everybody on this live stream. And we'll keep it going. Stay as long as you like. We'll just have the PowerPoint and music going. We're going to put on John's soundtrack.